Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, I want you to picture a graveyard, but not for people, for projects.
Okay.
Picture that specific graveyard of massive utopian smart cities, or these billion-dollar eco-villages. They get announced with these glossy renders, a huge press release.
Maybe a slip TED Talk.
Exactly. And then 3 years later, what is it? It's an empty field and a lawsuit.
The Vaporware Valley.
Right.
We see it constantly. It's the classic tragedy, really, where the vision just completely outruns the execution.
Right. And when we analyze these failures, we usually blame the market or the government or interest rates. But today's deep dive is based on a stack of internal documents from a project called Shiloh. And they argue that the killer is actually inside the house.
It's a fascinating premise, because on the surface, Shiloh looks like a real estate development, an Eco-Polis in Texas.
Right.
But if you strip away the architecture, what we're really analyzing today is, well, a new type of operating system for a civilization.
We have their master financial model, their risk register, and this thing called a phase development blueprint. And the argument these documents make is, I think, pretty radical. They claim the reason these big mission-driven projects fail is because of something called capital capture.
Which is a very polite academic way of saying you took too much money too early.
The money strangled the mission.
Yes. Or you built this massive infrastructure based on a build it and they will come idea. And when demand lagged by, say, even 10%, the maintenance costs just ate you alive.
So our mission today is to take apart the engine of Shiloh. We're not looking at the buildings, we're looking at the decisions. We're going to look at how they use phase gating.
Which they describe as a kind of financial constitution.
Exactly, a constitution to stop themselves from growing until they've actually earned the right to exist.
And that phrase right there, earning the right to scale, that is the heartbeat of this entire model. It's the absolute antithesis of the venture capital blitzscaling model.
Let's get into the philosophy of it before we hit the timeline. The documents contrast two ways of building: the blueprint model and the organism model. Can you explain that distinction? Because it sounds a bit like marketing fluff until you actually see the math.
It's not fluff at all. It's a crucial risk management strategy. A blueprint model is how we usually build cities. You design the whole thing: sewers, roads, library, housing.
The full adult skeleton on day one.
Precisely. And that requires massive upfront capital, which creates this enormous debt pressure.
So you're building a skeleton for a 200-pound adult, but you only have an infant's amount of muscle to move it.
Exactly. And the weight of that skeleton just crushes the project. Shiloh's organism model says no. You only build the skeletal structure that the current muscle mass, the economic activity, can actually support.
You grow the bones as the muscle grows.
That's it.
Okay, so let's walk through how this works in practice, because the phase logic here is incredibly strict. It starts with phase 0, which they call Genesis.
Right.
But don't let the biblical name fool you. This is all about bureaucratic handcuffs. The documents call this phase conception and lock.
And lock is the aggressive word there. And it's intentional. In a typical development, you might start digging a hole and then figure out the governance later. You're excited. You have investors.
You want to move dirt.
You want to move dirt, Shiloh says. Absolutely not. Phase 0 is where you convert a vague vision into an investable operating logic.
So what are we locking exactly?
You're locking the decision rights. Who has the power to spend money? Who has the power to change the mission? They write a constitution, and this is the key, they set up the treasury controls before there is any treasury to control.
That seems almost paranoid. Why lock down the treasury when you don't even have the money yet?
To prevent the founder-god complex. We've all seen this. A visionary founder gets a big check, wakes up one Tuesday, and decides to spend half the budget on a statue or a rebrand.
I see.
By locking the governance in phase 0, they de-risk the human element. They're pre-committing to a set of rules that even the founders can't break.
It's a Ulysses at the mast situation. You tie yourself down while you're sober so you don't crash the ship when the sirens start singing.
Precisely. They also generate a risk register in this phase. And this isn't just a to-do list. They map out every constraint: regulatory, environmental, financial. And they focus on demand capture. They aren't guessing people will show up. They're getting soft commitments.
The source material uses a specific word here that I really liked. It says phase 0 is about making the project legible.
Yes. Legibility is vital. If an underwriter, a bank, or a serious philanthropist looks at your dream, can they see a decision-grade plan? Or do they just see a hallucination?
Right.
Phase 0 turns the dream into a logic puzzle that solves itself. If you can't prove the logic on paper, you have no business digging a hole in the ground.
Okay, so let's assume they pass the phase zero gate. The Constitution is signed, the risk register is clear. Now we move to phase one, dawn. The documents describe this as the minimum viable polis.
Right. Now we move from paperwork to physics. But notice the restraint here.
That's the focus.
Acquire, enable, activate. They secure the land, 86 acres in this case, and establish what they call sovereignty infrastructure.
That's the microgrid and the water systems?
Correct.
Yeah.
They want the organism to be self-sufficient at a baseline level immediately. But look at the spatial strategy. They don't try to build a town square. They don't build a housing.
Right.
They focus entirely on the Northland region.
I wanted to ask about that. Why Northland? Looking at the map, this is the area for events, glamping, markets. It seems a bit trivial. If you're building a civilization, why start with a campground?
Because of velocity. Northland is the ignition district. These are high-velocity, short-term revenue assets. Glamping tents, festival grounds, market stalls. These things are cheap to build, fast to deploy.
And they generate cash flow on day one.
On day one, instead of building a library that costs $10 million and earns zero, you build a venue that costs $100,000 and earns immediately.
So it's cash, but it's more than that.
It is. It's also credibility. This is about public visibility. If you can run a successful festival, you prove to the world and to your investors that you can actually operate. You're not just a slide deck anymore. You're a destination.
And what's the pass-fail metric here? Is it just profit?
The sources call it proof of life. The goal isn't profit maximization yet. The goal is to prove the engine stack works.
What does that mean?
Can we get 500 people onto the site without the toilets backing up? Can the microgrid handle the load? Can we process the waste? The basics?
It's stress testing the organism?
Exactly. And if the answer is no, you do not pass go. You don't collect $200. You stay in phase one until you fix it.
Which brings us to phase two. The documents call this expansion, but the subheader is what caught my eye. It says, mandate, stabilization.
Which feels contradictory, doesn't it?
Eh.
Usually expansion means growth at all costs. But here, the logic flips. This phase is about proving that the chaos of the phase one launch can be turned into a boring, repeatable machine.
And the mechanism for this is the reserve hierarchy. I spent some time looking at the financial model here, and this is where the discipline gets really aggressive.
It is relentless. This is where most projects die, honestly. They get a little bit of money in phase one, and they immediately spend it on new growth.
So walk us through the hierarchy. Let's say the Northland glamping site has a great year. It makes $1 million in profit. In a normal startup, I'm taking that million and I'm launching phase three immediately.
Right.
What does Shiloh make me do?
Shiloh says, stop. You cannot touch that money for growth yet. It triggers a waterfall of buckets. First, you have to fill the operating reserve. That's your keep the lights on money for a certain number of months.
Okay, standard prudent business.
Then you have to fill the replacement reserve. That's money strictly set aside for when the tents rip, the pumps fail, or the roads need grading. You are pre-funding depreciation.
Still just maintenance. I still can't build anything new.
Not yet. Only after those buckets are full do you fill the stabilization reserve. This is a strategic buffer for economic shocks, a recession, a pandemic, a regulatory fine.
Okay.
And only after that bucket overflows, then, and only then, is it considered free cash flow for new construction.
Wow. So the system legally prohibits you from expanding if you aren't resilient yet. It forces you to be anti-fragile.
And here's the kicker. The rule says if revenue engines are unstable, resequence. Do not build.
Resequence.
It means if your phase one engine is buttering, you don't get to build phase two to try and fix it. You have to pause. You don't double down on a losing hand. You fix the engine before you add more weight to the car.
That requires an incredible amount of patience. I can just imagine the pressure from investors or the community saying, why aren't we building the big stuff yet?
That is the tension, but that patience is what buys you durability.
Okay, so let's say we filled the buckets, we're stable. Now we move to phase 3 and 4. The civic build-out and maturity. This is where we finally see the central region, the Great Hall, the Wellness Center.
The Education Institute. Yes,
Yeah.
This is where the heavy institutional assets come online.
But again, I have to play devil's advocate here. If this is a mission-driven project focused on education and wellness, why wait until phase 3? Why not build the Education Institute first?
Because financially, those are anchors, not sales. They're high fixed costs, long duration assets. They're heavy.
Right.
If you build a massive education institute in phase 1, the operating costs will drain your treasury before you've earned a single dollar. You wait for phase 3, because you need the economic engine of phase 2, the glamping, the events, the retail, to be strong enough to subsidize the mission.
That makes perfect sense. It's that earn the right concept again. You build the profitable things to pay for the meaningful things.
And the goal of phase 3 becomes year-round demand smoothing. In phase 1, you're dependent on seasonal festivals, very peak and valley.
Mhm.
In phase 3, you have students, you have patients, you have members. That stabilizes the demand across the entire year, which locks in the durability of the revenue.
And phase 4 is maturity, the steady state.
Right. You stop building. You optimize. The goal here is generating a durable surplus. And again, the discipline holds. The surplus isn't for bonuses. It follows the hierarchy. Fund reserves, harden resilience, and then reinvestment.
It feels less like a real estate developer and more like an endowment manager.
That's a very apt comparison. It's institutional thinking, not transactional thinking.
I want to jump to the end of the timeline because I found something in the spatial sequencing map that, frankly, it seemed like a mistake at first.
Just Southland.
Yeah, the residential housing. In every development deal I have ever seen, you build the condos first. You pre-sell the homes to get the cash to build the rest of the town. But Shiloh puts the residential housing last. Phase 4. Why on earth would you wait?
It is completely backwards by modern standards, isn't it?
Yeah.
But think about what happens when you build the housing first. You get a bedroom community.
A commuter town.
Exactly. You have people living there.
Yeah.
But there's no culture, there's no economy, no gravity. They just sleep there and drive somewhere else to live their lives.
So Shiloh's logic is,
You don't build the bedroom until you've built the house.
so they build the Northland for cash, the Central District for culture and institutions, and only then do they invite people to live there permanently.
Right. Because by the time the residents move in, they aren't moving into a construction site or a ghost town. They're moving into a functioning civilization. The economy is there to employ them. The culture is there to integrate them.
That is a massive gamble on cash flow, though. You have to survive a long time without that condo money.
It is. But it protects the mission from what you might call culture capture. If you sell to homeowners on day 1, you get whoever has the money. They might not care about your eco-mission. They just want a cheap house.
I see.
If you sell on day 1,000, you get residents who are aligned with the culture you've already built. It's about curating the citizenry, not just filling units.
That leads right into phase 5, Commonwealth. The shift here is that Shiloh stops being the only project and becomes a generator.
The objective is replication without dilution. They want to launch new nodes, using the credibility and the surplus generated by the mature, original Shiloh.
But how do they ensure these new nodes don't just become cheap franchises? Shiloh Light.
They have 3 components for this. First, the template standardized operating systems. Second, the network. But the most important one is the academy.
The academy.
They recognize that human capital is the bottleneck. You can have the money and the blueprints, but if you don't have leaders who understand the culture and the governance, it will fail. So phase 5 focuses on training founding teams.
That's brilliant. You're not just franchising a business model, you're replicating the capacity to run the model.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the sources emphasize that replication is a governed act. It requires underwriting discipline.
Yeah.
You don't just let anyone open a node. You have to ensure that the new node doesn't destabilize the core.
It's like a cell dividing.
It is.
Mhm.
You have to make sure the DNA is intact before you split.
I want to circle back to anti-capture one last time before we wrap up. We mentioned at the start that capital capture is the enemy. How does this system really stop a billionaire donor from walking in during phase 3 and hijacking the mission?
It goes back to the Constitution we talked about in phase 0. The sources detail a separation of capital from control.
Meaning?
In a typical deal, if I give you 50% of the money, I get 50% of the vote. Shiloh's model decouples that.
So I can invest, I can get a return, but I can't vote on the board.
Correct. Investors or donors acquire financial rights, but they do not acquire governance rights over the mission. And that go-hold resequence scorecard we mentioned acts as an automated shield. If a big investor says, I want you to build a giant statue now, but the scorecard says, hold because the reserves aren't full,
The answer is legally no.
the answer is no.
Yeah.
The system is designed to protect the project from human nature, from our impatience, our ego, and the influence of money.
So bringing this all together, we've gone from Genesis to Commonwealth. For you listening to this, whether you're running a startup, managing a foundation, or looking at city planning, what's the core takeaway here?
For me, the so what is that the value of Shiloh isn't just the place being built in Texas. It's the operating system.
Yeah.
It's a replicable, model for managing complexity and risk in a way that respects the long term.
It really challenges that blitzscaling mindset.
Completely. We live in a world obsessed with scaling things as fast as possible. Shiloh offers a counterargument. It says that true civilization, building things that last 100 years, requires the humility to let the organism grow at its natural pace.
You can't force a tree to grow by pulling on the branches.
You'll just snap the wood. It forces you to ask, are we building for the exit or are we building for the inheritance? If you're building for the exit, you build fast and cheap. If you're building for inheritance, you build like Shiloh.
That is the tension between ambition and restraint, and I think that's where we'll leave it. If you want to dig deeper into the actual numbers, and the master financial model is a beast of a document, check out the Shiloh Genesis Master Library.
It's worth a read just for the risk register alone. It's a masterclass in seeing around corners.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the phase logic of Shiloh. We'll see you next time.